Hi friends! Welcome to Growing as Grown-Ups, where we believe each of us has the opportunity to keep growing in ways that can fundamentally improve our life effectiveness, our leadership influence, and our well-being. Through interviews, stories, and practical principles, we explore how you can accelerate your growth and unlock your potential to make the difference you want to make. And now, your hosts from the Leaders Lyceum, Dr. Sara Musgrove and Dr. Keith Eigel.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Growing as Grown-Ups podcast. Sara and I are actually sitting in the same room together for the first time ever on these. We're having fun. We wanted to try this one time. If you're watching us on video, you may see the sides of both of our heads a lot as we look at each other and actually carry on a real conversation face to face. But Sara, I'm kind of excited about this little series we're going to try and pull off over the summer. And we're going to kick it off a little bit with personality, sort of extending the conversation that you had with John Golden last time we were together. So any sort of intro thoughts before we jump in?
Yeah, I think this is a fun new twist on what we've been doing. The first set of episodes we did were conversations with leaders where they shared their stories. Then we had on some experts to talk about some areas of leadership that they felt were really important. And now our hope is that we can use these next 4 or 5 episodes to really talk about the things that we believe are key foundational elements or building blocks of the way that we approach growth, right? Because our podcast is Growing as Grown-Ups. And so really getting tactical with people about ways that they can keep growing using the things that we know over our years of experience really helps. So that's where we're going. And as you said, we are going to pick up where we left off last week with John Golden. And I think a great way to start, I asked him this question, so I'm going to ask you.
Oh dear.
Why is personality something that is useful in development and growth? Why is it something that when you built this curriculum years ago, you made sure to include a personality assessment?
Yeah, we've talked about it in and out of so many of these podcasts that we've done, but the Growing as Grown-Ups name was not coincidental, right? It was on purpose, as it turns out. And the thing is that we know that the thing that grows us in the way that matters most. There are a number of things that grow us. There are skill sets that we can develop. There are abilities that we have that we can kind of leverage in certain ways. There are good matches in our career or, with the partner we choose or different things like that that make a difference. But we believe one of the things that grows us the very most is that our lens keeps changing. I don't remember what podcast it was, but we talked with me, I was the guest, where we really went through kind of the leader levels model a little bit. And it's about lens change. And what lens change is about is seeing ourselves, others, and the world differently than we saw ourselves prior to that moment or that time period. And the thing that facilitates growth in that way more than anything else is the idea of challenge and contradiction, right? When we defined that during that episode, but if you guys missed it, challenge and contradiction is really when you bump up against something that your current lens does not make perfect sense of. It's like there is some confusion in it, or I don't know what to do with it. So that's what we mean by the contradiction. And I think the thing that's interesting about personality is that a lot of times the challenge and contradiction we bump up against hurts. Right?
I do know.
Yeah, it's right. It's painful. Oh my gosh, and you guys have heard Sara talk about this on the podcast because you've got kind of this instantaneous middle school kid kind of family. And it's like, wow. Brian, I'm sorry if you're listening to this, but is this what I signed up for, right? Or way different story. But when my dad got sick, it's like, oh my gosh, this is painful and it's hard. And by the way, those challenges are not the kind of things we sign up for, right? We endure them. And if we endure them well, we grow from them. So they have value. And I think that is a deep-seated, multi-thousand-year-long truth, right? That it's when we bump up against hard stuff, it goes all the way back to Aristotle, but certainly through almost biblical times and early philosophers and all of this kind of stuff, it shows up and shows up and shows up.
Okay, so pull it back to personality.
Personality. Okay, so
We're
what?
going to Aristotle. Let's
I know.
come back to
So
personality.
what happens with personality is personality, and specifically on the heels of Golden's podcast that we did in the last episode. It gives us a way to introduce challenge and contradiction into our world that's actually kind of fun if we don't take it too seriously. I mean, if we, and there are parts of it we should take seriously or more seriously than others, but I think we'll talk about this a little bit later in the podcast, but there are really lighthearted things that we can engage in that the life-changing growth may not come from, but a tiny bit of refinement, a little bit of lens change can come from it. So
Tiny challenge, tiny growth.
tiny challenge, tiny growth. And back to the formula, right? And so I think the thing that's important for people to realize is that there are so many opportunities to take really good stuff. And over the last 5 years, what you and I have seen is that a lot of assessment has moved from you have to find a professional who's certified to be able to give you the assessment and debrief the assessment with you, to assessments being able for any of us to go online, purchase the assessment like Golden is doing now, get our feedback in a way that is written to us as a consumer, and go, wow, is that really me? Is that how I show up? Boy, that is my opportunity for growth, isn't it? It's whatever that feedback is that connects with you in a way that is like, I don't know if that's exactly the way I saw it before. Now you've introduced challenge and contradiction, and man, and you can just pace these things out over the course of a year, or just go back and reread things that you've already taken and say, is this still true about me, or the same? Anyway, I can go on. Are you aware of that?
I do. It's
Okay.
part of your personality.
All right. So thank you. What a great tie-in. And your part of your personality is keeping us on track. So keep us on track.
Yeah, I love everything you said, and I think it's true. And personality assessments are not challenge in the way that we typically define it, but understanding your personality is a way for you to kind of expand the pool of challenges, right? And I think a couple podcast guests that we had on have really fun stories. Yeah. And we were listening back and going back through the previous episodes, and some of the ones we pulled out were just really great stories. And we have two different leaders that we think are just great leaders who have very different personalities.
Very different personalities.
But one of them, both of them have experienced challenge that comes from if I'm just doing the thing that comes naturally to me. And that's the way we think about personality in terms of how we use the Golden. Is it's kind of this natural preference for how you engage with the world.
Yeah.
Right. And you may or may not be able to put words to it, which is part of the value of having the assessment. But when you just kind of go with that natural tendency, your natural preferences, eventually you're going to bump into some challenges. And so we have a quote from our guest that we had early on. Which one do you want to do first?
I want to do the more fun one.
You want to do
first.
fun? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So Mike Lauderdale.
Episode 7.
Yeah. And Mike is just such. So here's the thing, folks, that we said this in the preview to this interview with Mike. People follow Mike. I mean, he is like a highly effective leader, but I think, no offense to any other guests, he is the most fun-spirited.
Yeah, you can't help but smile when you're around him.
Right. So why don't we hit pause on our conversation for just, like literally just 2 minutes or something, and let them listen to this segment from Mike's interview. We'll be right back.
It's so much easier. Remember the little small bouncy ball that you would get? Yeah, I think you still buy them out of the little candy machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you bounce them and then they just go off the wall. That's my natural desire. I just want to bounce off the wall and have a good time. Bounce me again. But then you have to learn, okay, how do you control the bounce to actually say, okay, I'm going to hit the ball and I want it to hit that spot on the wall, and you keep doing it over and over until you can. But know that you still have the ability to bounce all over the wall, but you're training yourself to bounce in one direction.
All right, Sarah. So bounce me again. Bounce me
Bounce me
again.
again.
I know. And so
Love
And
it.
so if you guys understand, so Mike is what is known in sort of the Myers-Briggs or the golden vernacular as an extroverted, intuitive, feeling adapter or perceiver, depending on if golden and Myers-Briggs respectively. So
all inspiration, all vision, all let's bring people together and encourage them.
and a huge orientation toward fun. What's fun, right? I mean, it's a huge value that a lot of NFs hold. And the thing that I love about this quote, and please jump in, just interrupt me, take over, however you want to handle this. But the recognition that he has, that his preference, his desire, is just to be all over the place all the time. Like, wouldn't that be fun just to go from this thing to this thing to this thing? But because I have a growth goal, because I want to be better and more effective, because I want to connect, in ways that are important to others, I need at times to actually direct my bouncing, right? And how cool would it be if at times when I chose, I could hit the same spot on the wall over and over and over again, right? And that, I just love that image of starting out, because it talks about, we have our natural tendencies. John Golden actually bumped into this a little bit, and I don't know if I wrote this down, but it was about the uniqueness and the sameness, and how we have to understand how we are like other people before we can fully embrace how we're unique.
Yeah.
Right. And so so the personality theory speaks into it in that way. But for Mike, the growth goal was really to not always be just the way that he felt like he acknowledged he's more built to be. But how do I direct it in a way?
I think Mike is a great example of something I tell people all the time when I hear them. I hear it a lot around the Enneagram these days, but I hear it also around personality types when people use it as a label to define them. I am a blank. Oh, but I'm a type 1. That's why I feel that way. That's why I did that thing, right? It's really easy for me to use that. And I always tell people, you have a personality, your personality doesn't have you, right? And Mike came to the realization that he can't just be controlled by his desire to bounce all over the place and be happy and energetic and inspirational. He had to take ownership of that and say, that serves me well a lot of times, but I need to be disciplined and intentional to make sure that I'm growing into the person that I want to be on purpose and not limited by the way I'm naturally wired. And so I think that is a fun story that there's more to it in Mike's interview. If you didn't get a chance to hear it, it's just a podcast that'll make you smile because he has so much energy, but he talks more about that in the interview. The other person.
Time out, because I don't want folks to miss something you said. And it was that we have a personality. Our personality does not have us. And this is so true when we can get our arms around this, because so many people allow, well, that's just the way I am, kind of deal with it. That's the way I'm built. And especially leaders sometimes have a tendency to ask, the way we talked about it at different times, is it's almost like they're asking others to meet them where they are.
Right.
But people can do this with more than just personality. They can do it with their intelligence. Like, folks, you have an intelligence. Your intelligence does not have you, right? You have a body. Your body does not have you. It's like all of these things that we have. Part of growing well is understanding that this soul, this being, this whatever we are, is not had by these other things. It has these other things.
And we're going to do a whole other episode specifically on this topic of learning to take ownership and responsibility for all these things that maybe early in life we tend to feel like we are victims to or influenced by.
Yeah. And, I bet you can. I know I can. I can look back early in my life and I can see the 15-year-old version of Keith or the 22-year-old version of Keith, or even at times when it got me in trouble, the 5-year-old version of Keith that got in trouble because I was allowing my personality to have me. Well, you don't understand. I'm just spontaneous, right? And spontaneous can get you fired, right? It's like and it's so what are your larger goals? Like, and this relates back to the original question about how does this help us grow? Well, when we understand these tendencies that we have, and this will bleed in perfectly to this next little segment we want to share with them again. But when we allow ourselves to just do what's natural to us, a lot of times it's fighting the thing that is actually more important to us than just doing what's natural, right? Yeah. And I think Jason's interview is really a great example of that.
Yeah, so Jason Young was episode 21, and he was talking, his area of specialty is on hospitality and leading volunteers, but I think he's been one of my favorite guests because his leadership advice was so applicable outside of volunteer experiences that I was just continually amazed by what he was saying. But if you listen to his podcast, you notice there was such a theme of empathy and being mindful and aware of how you were impacting people, which is a very, in our personality lingo, a very feeler orientation. But I had the insight of knowing Jason's personality type is naturally the opposite of that. He is a thinker. And so I just started thinking, I was like, Jason, how did you end up being a person whose platform is all about thinking about the impact you're having on people and having empathy? And he talks about how he kind of learned the hard way that being this outspoken, share my opinion, tell people what to do personality, which is more the way he's naturally wired, this NT kind of natural leader, speak your mind, always have an opinion, that it isn't working for him. And so he tells a little bit about that in the podcast interview that I think is just a great way to show how he has taken that responsibility over his personality and said, this is causing a lot of challenge for me that I don't want, and it's working against my goals. What do I do about it? So let's play Jason's clip.
Back up years ago, I thought because I have an opinion, that opinion always has to be expressed. And what I learned is that is not helpful. And you're like, well, golly, how long did it take you to learn that? Probably too long. But I think as leaders, what I didn't pay attention to, Sara, is I spent more time talking than I did listening. And what I realized is that other people treated me the same way. And I didn't like it. And why I couldn't put 2 and 2 together is just beyond me. And I think the more I don't know, grew, I really worked hard and kind of on my own emotional intelligence and just navigating some of those spaces. And it really occurred to me that I talk more than I listen. So I need to grow in that. And every time I think of something, an opinion or perspective or insight, I actually don't always have to share it, because what it eventually did is it alienated people, or you might not get invited to meetings, or people see you as a know-it-all or arrogant. I'm like, why would they do that? Oh, well, you're right. I would too if I did that. So I think that's a thing as a leader I learned, is to listen more than I talk. I don't always have to share everything. Ask questions. I can always wish I had said something, but if I said it, I can't take it back. And so it's just navigating, maybe it comes down, maybe the denominator about all those things is making wiser decisions as a leader, and remembering that every single one of those decisions, it does have an emotional impact on somebody else.
Sara, the thing that I love about Jason's quote is he never has to use the word NT or intuitive thinker to kind of be an NT, even in the way he's processing this information. And you know, I think the thing is again, like with Mike, what Jason is displaying as someone who has grown well and has matured well and does have influence is that when he had this awareness that I talk too much, that I state my opinion too quickly, that I always state my opinion, and that it wasn't moving people, that it was actually getting them to tune him out.
Yeah.
And in worse cases, especially when you have direct reports, a lot of times for NTs, people feel run over or hurt or like they are not being paid attention to. And that can be exactly the opposite of what you want from people that work from you, which is just dismotivating, unmotivating. It gives them no motivation, right, to do what they need to do. And so again, what a perfect example of how having this kind of thing named, which would be in a growth objective section of his report, sometimes sit back and let others speak before you speak, is what's in his report, right? At least in his golden report.
Yeah.
But I bet it shows up over a number of things that he winds up taking.
Yeah. And I'm guessing he went through our experience and had the golden after that. So it's like he had the challenge, but maybe didn't realize at that point it was the nature of his personality. But then he got his golden assessment, could see, oh, this is why I was doing this. To Golden's point last episode was understanding your personality, getting that feedback is a way for you to understand why you're doing the things you're doing. It doesn't change what you're doing.
Right.
It just gives you insight into that.
Right. And then you get to evaluate against the bigger you that you want to be, or if you want to think about it this way, the influence that you want to have, the difference that you want to make. What are the motivating bigger you words that you would put on that? Because when you weigh that kind of truer north, that I would like to move more in this values-oriented direction of having an impact, making a difference, etc. You can then use this kind of a report to challenge your more natural tendencies to figure out, is this really serving me well? Right? With Mike is bouncing everywhere, serving me well. With Jason is always expressing an opinion that, by the way, was probably almost always really close to the right opinion.
Yeah.
A lot of times NTs just have a knack for seeing direction so clearly that it is the way we should be going, even if every detail was not accounted for. But is that always serving what the influence that you're wanting to have with others? So, I mean, that's to me was the most important thing about Jason's interview. And I think in a way that bleeds us in pretty nicely into the idea of effectiveness, right? Because, I mean, when we think about personality and its relationship to how effective we're being, how do you tend to think about that? Or do you just want me to keep going? I felt like I was talking for too long.
Well, I think about it in terms of the times that I have felt least effective. I can now pinpoint it's because I was not working in an area where I got to leverage any of my strengths.
That is convicting.
It was, I can think of this job that I had before I met you, where it was like crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis, all reactive, never getting closure, never feeling like I could get ahead or check anything off the list. And you know me well enough to know I love a checklist. I love that sense of completion, of accomplishment. And I hated it. And finally I realized now, having gotten more insight into my personality, I didn't feel effective because I felt like I was always working out of my weaknesses. I was always having to do, it's like we use the analogy, and I think I probably used it in a different podcast, but working in your preferences is like writing with your dominant hand.
Yeah.
Working outside of your preferences is like writing with your non-dominant hand, where it takes more energy, more focus, more concentration. It's messier. It's harder to do well. And so if I want to be effective, I want to, as much as I can, be able to leverage my strengths. But to the point of the two guests that we just highlighted, you don't get to only work in your strengths, right? Because then you're gonna bump into things that don't work and don't lead towards your purposes. You have to learn how to grow in those other areas. And so to be able to name, my natural preference is to be very diligent and organized and checklisty is great, but I can't force that on you because that's not how you work. And so I've got to learn to kind of leverage your adaptability in just different areas like that. And I think to me, being able to identify that. And one thing that's really fun about a personality assessment in terms of creating self-awareness is I don't always see the things that are my strengths as strengths because they just come naturally to me. It's just easy for me. I don't have to work at it. So I don't think that it's that big of a deal. But having a report call out and say, hey, here's something that you add to your leadership roles, or here's how you contribute to your environment.
So good.
Makes me go, oh, really? Not everybody's like that? Oh, maybe I should do more of that.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a perfect expression. I mean, I'm still processing this John Golden quote that when we understand how we're alike other people through this kind of personality theory categorization where people sometimes feel put in boxes, what you actually begin to understand more clearly is how uniquely equipped you are, because we're not all built the same.
Right.
Yeah. You took an approach that was very much about how do I get back into my strengths in order to be effective. And I think the quotes that the little clips that we have, they're both short of folks that operated in that world. They were really recognizing how to tie what they were good at to the thing that was required of them, right? And how did they create alignment around that? But again, it's gaining, and not only gaining. I actually loved listening to you just talk about you, because it is so clear in the way you just talked about it that it's not. You didn't read and memorize a report, right? It's connected with you in a way that is now internalized. It is, you own it. It is a different lens through which you see that, because somebody probably could have named a lot of those characteristics in you when you were 21 years old, but you were just being that thing.
Right.
Yeah. How do you want to get into these other two clips?
So we have two other fun clips that really captured some of the points we wanted to make, and we'll just pick one to go first.
Yeah, well, let's do Jeff. He's on the top of my pile.
All right, so Jeff Henderson, he was episode number 5. You interviewed him, and he gives such a beautiful description of how to grow and become more effective, both by knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're not good at. And so he came to a point where he realized what is hard for him. And rather than making it his goal to just become a person who's good at this thing, he uses his strengths to kind of reframe that problem. And now it's something that matters to him in a new way. And he's able to lean into it in a new way. So let's just let Jeff tell his story, and then we'll talk about it in a second. So here we go. Jeff Henderson.
I'm naturally an encourager, and you know this. So conflict will always be a weak spot for me. And I just don't do it well. I probably do it better than I think. It's just so excruciating to me, because I would much rather encourage and tell people that, because I look at life a little bit more, maybe too optimistic at times. But if I'm not careful, I can encourage someone down the wrong road. And so for me to be able to challenge people, and here was a big aha moment for leadership for me. I didn't know that if you gave people feedback, and it was critical feedback, and they didn't do this job particularly well, they would actually like that. I didn't know that that was actually a real thing. I just thought they were kidding. And not everyone does, but so many people would say, oh, that's a gift, because I didn't know that. But now that I know that, it's going to help me get better. And so I had to make the shift, and I'm making it every single day. It's not like I've turned the corner and I'm cool with conflict, but I saw conflict differently by seeing it as if I see something that someone on our team is doing that's not pushing us forward and not helping them, if I shy away from that, I'm being disloyal to them. And when I saw that as being disloyal to them, it really kicked in the true care and empathy I have for people to go, oh, I'm going to move toward that now, because now I see it as a way to care for them versus a way to criticize them. And so but I'm telling you, I will always walk with a limp as it relates to conflict.
Keith, wasn't that so fun?
I love that. I love that whole thing.
I know. Even just the way he talks about walking with a limp, right? He knows it's always going to be hard for him because it's just natural, not his natural tendency. And I don't know Jeff's personality, but I'm guessing we're wired pretty similarly in that.
He's an NFC.
Yeah, I don't like conflict, but this advice of learning to see giving feedback or speaking hard truth to someone as a way to actually care for them.
Yeah.
So using his feeling orientation as a way to address something that otherwise felt uncaring, right? To reframe that is such a powerful way. And I give this advice to people all the time when I'm teaching personality, because feelers tend to have a harder time giving critical feedback if they have to fire somebody or if they have to tell somebody they're not doing a job well.
It feels so uncaring.
It feels awful. I'll stay up all night worrying about it beforehand. I'll stay up all night afterwards. Did I do it well? But to say the best thing I can do, and I think about it even with my husband or my friends, the most loving and caring thing I can do for you is to be truthful, right? It makes it so much more compelling. And it's just what Jeff said is when he was able to shift it to saying, giving feedback is a sign of loyalty, then gosh, how could I not?
Yeah, loyalty and compassion, right? And I saw conflict differently by saying it as something that someone on our team is doing that's not pushing forward and not helping them. And so to shy away from that as being disloyal.
Yeah.
Wow. Right. And then I think my favorite part of that little clip is, but I'm telling you, I will always walk with a limp when it relates to conflict. So it's never like, oh my gosh, this now is the easiest thing in the world for me. And you've told this in stories before personally, but the idea is not to become someone you're not, right? The idea is to become a more perfect. You've heard us say this on this podcast. The idea is to become a more perfected version of yourself. And I love the way Jeff captures the spirit of that, right? That there is that if I'm an NF or like you, an SF, I don't need to become a hard edge, the truth always matters, just deal with it, you'll get over it kind of person. You can, but recasting again, in terms of your effectiveness, the thing that matters more to you, what's the bigger value? The bigger value for Jeff was loyalty and care and concern for other people.
All right. So flip that around though. Let's go back to Jason Young, who's wired differently.
Yeah.
How did Jason in his NT mind come to believe so powerfully that empathy is the key?
Oh my gosh, you can almost see it. He realized he was being ineffective. Right. It wasn't really about it's like, I'm not getting where we need to go when I always state my opinion. There was almost a logic behind it. And yet, because we know of all the other things in Jason's interview, is that doesn't mean he's without compassion. It just means that he's built to be a little bit more logic, effectiveness. How are we going to accomplish our goals? A little bit more that kind of NT edge that is driving toward accomplishment in some ways, but
and the most meaningful, effective way to get there is to inspire people to want to go there with you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All right. So good. That's so good.
All right. And that kind of tees us up for our last quote we want to share. And this is just a fun image that I love. I was interviewing my friend Christy Gordy in episode 4, and she talks about this again, not on purpose, talking about personality, but this idea of she had to come to terms with who she is. She had to own who she is and own who she's not. And as she was trying to work towards being effective and solve problems, and she was getting advice, you'll hear her talk about how her awareness of her strengths and her personality played into that. So let's hear from Christy.
The challenge when you're in a hard time is that everyone has advice for you and you want to take that advice. You need that advice. You need that help. But if you have someone that tackles a problem like a linebacker and you are a ninja acrobat, right? Like you don't have the brawn and aggression, then you often, if you don't know yourself, which let's admit it, most of us are going to constantly be on this journey of learning ourselves. But if you don't know that difference about yourself and own it, then you will try to tackle that problem like they wanted you to, and that works for them, and it will crush you, right? And potentially for good, right? And then you have to try to figure out, okay, that's not my skill, and this isn't because I'm a failure at, I might be a failure at being a linebacker, but I'm not a failure at this problem. I can still overcome this problem, but I have to own who I am and find other people who can teach me how to be that best version. And sometimes there isn't another mentor who's wired with that same combination in your life. And so you just have to test and fail. How do I be the female feeler, founder, creative, and tackle this really hard problem that other people would handle in a much different way?
Okay, Sara, we both love Christy, and folks, I know we covered this, but the work that she's doing in the world is really cool work. So that what she's doing matters. But unless you dropped off during that last quote that we just played, Christy's not a linebacker.
No, she's not.
I mean, she's a little bit like Mike in a way. She's just creative and connected to everything that's going on, all of the problems in the world. But I love the way she said, I'm not a linebacker, I'm an acrobat.
Yeah. And
so if I try to be a linebacker, I may fail at being a linebacker, but this does not mean I can't solve the problem in front of me. Yeah. And you said this, you said this before. It is not, we were just talking about a minute ago. How did you say that we're not, that we don't need to become someone we're not, right? That there's not just one type of leader. Go on with that for a minute.
So I think there's stereotypes of what a leader looks like, right? And we could all describe right now, if I said describe a leader. And I think the damage that causes is that people like Christy or people like Jeff Henderson or people like me don't see ourselves matching that image. But if we're trying to be that image, this strong, bold, decisive, strategic leader, we're always going to fail at it because that's not who we are. But recognizing that any personality can be a leader and can have influence. But the way that we're effective at that is being our own kind of leader, leading in the way that you were built and designed and wired to lead, not always trying to be somebody else. Yeah.
And yet not only being that way that you're sort of innately built, right? Because when we get our personality test back, it usually, they almost all of them type us in some way. But again, if we allow that type to define us, or we don't ever grow in ways that are bigger than that type,
we become the uncontrolled bouncy ball.
We do become the uncontrolled bouncy ball, or it means that leadership really is only for the handful of people who are kind of built for this sort of George Patton, directive, run them over, take the hill kind of person. Henderson even said that at a different part of his interview where he said, I'm not the take the hill kind of person. I want to, and when I realized that was okay, that I could still be effective, but in order to still be effective, we've got to deal with the things that our type, the things that we learn about us through this does not do that well, right? I mean, I know that is completely true for me, that if I just were me, it would be a train wreck, and it's a train wreck half the time anyway, folks. But when I put in front of me that I want us to have an impact in facilitating the growth of others to become everything that they were meant to be, all of a sudden I can be more disciplined. I can have a different kind of follow through. There are times that I can even be directive. I think that's my least favorite thing to do, probably, is to be super clear and directive. I want to keep the options open. But if I do that leading up to a day with a client, we're falling down, right?
Yeah. So let's use this as the transition point then to talk about how do we actually use personality as a tool to help us grow. Because if we haven't convinced people by now that it does matter,
Yeah.
then I'm done. I don't have any other compelling reasons to tell people why it does matter. But if people have bought in and if they've made it this far, they see that this could be a valuable way to help them grow. What do we actually do to grow using personality as this source of challenge and contradiction, or this new mirror to which we can look into to see ourselves in a different way?
Yeah. So the thing is, I think, and we're going to get to some resources at the very end of the podcast, or just some ideas that you can turn to. But because this doesn't demand, because personality assessment, any kind of typing tool, any kind of online feedback instrument where you are getting feedback from a system based on the way that you chose to answer some questions, if it's a well-done assessment, you are bringing in an understanding of your natural tendencies, that the goal then is to not go, oh my gosh, I've always wondered why I was like that. Or I never thought I was like that. Maybe I should go be different. I mean, you talked to the woman, I did not talk to her, but what was the famous quote from this person that, I'll just say this person that came through one of our programs?
No, I know. I may have even told this to Dr. Golden last time, but she got her assessment and it came back as pegging her as an extrovert. And she had always considered herself an introvert. And she came up to me at a break, just looking really overwhelmed and sad, and said, I don't know what to do. I always thought I was an introvert, but now that I'm an extrovert, I don't have an excuse to not go to this party.
So I guess I have to go to the party this weekend.
And I wanted to say something else, but I, in my head, was thinking, you're a grown woman.
Yeah.
You don't go to the party if you don't want to go to the party. But she was so defined. She had used introvert as something that controlled her path.
Yeah.
That she didn't know what to do when that was gone.
Yeah. So I think we've been making this point through most of the podcast, that one of the primary ways that we can use this to grow ourselves is to just allow that feedback to be a source of challenge, contradiction, confirmation, but asking ourselves, what do I hold to be more true about me because of this? Or what do I wish that I was different in? Or how is this working against the goals that I'm trying to create? All of these are good questions to be asking ourselves. I think a lot of times just creating the awareness and letting our day unfold, right? Just all of a sudden we start seeing expressions of the thing that we read in the report. I mean, you know that one of the things that we encourage people to do who come through our programs is that we say, read one little set of descriptors from your personality report. It won't take you 30 seconds. We tell people to do it while they're brushing their teeth in the morning. And then put the report down and let your day unfold. And it is surprising how often you will see connecting points that then allow you to own in a new and more tangible way how the way your being is showing up with others, with the way that you're tackling problems in all of these areas. I think, Sara, before we close this, and I know we want to close it in the next 10 minutes or so, I want to talk about another way that is related to our own growth, but it's also related to how we are different than the people we may live with or work with. Yeah. When we begin to understand ourselves more deeply, I experience this in leaders. Almost every really sharp leader I've ever coached has an in-depth understanding of the way they're built. They've been personality assessmented up through their organizations. And so they get it, they can use the vocabulary. But the deeper we understand ourselves and the more we can really own that, right? Own it in a way that we're fluent in it, the way we can talk about it, even if it's using language like Mike, where you're just talking about bouncy balls, right? It's still really descriptive. What you start to see is how others are the same or different than you. And the reality is any of us in our own little vacuum is not as good as we can be in the collective. And so we talk about this a lot as leveraging the diversity of perspective, or leveraging personality diversity in a way that when we're talking about effectiveness, when we're talking about growth, when we're seeing what works for other people and what works for us, not only does it grow us, and not only does it have the potential to grow others, but it usually makes us better when we are open to the person who is opposite us in some way. I mean, honestly, I don't know if we want to get into any, like, here's what happens here kind of stuff. But you and I are not opposites, but we're really different on a couple of key characteristics that are measured in most personality reports. And your kind of to-do list, discipline, bring it to closure, let's finish it, let's a little bit of a perfectionistic bent. And
The
I'm
spreadsheet that I built to plan out these
to
podcasts.
provide the spreadsheet for the podcast is a good example, right? And I don't even know how to say anything positive about myself in relationship to that, because I value all of those things. But together, what we found is not only when we respect what the other brings, pay attention to it, value it, the product that we wind up creating as an organization is better with both of those, or 3 or 4 perspectives coming together, right? And folks, it's really hard to leverage the beauty and the potential that sits in the diversity of perspective if we don't understand the diversity of perspective, right? So making this part of your learning, reading, discovery, self-discovery effort, it's what the most effective people do. That's the other reason, by the way, I didn't think of this earlier, but that's the other reason that we put this in our programs, is the most effective leaders have a deep self-authored, self-aware understanding of what they do and don't bring, and the things that they're working on, right? So, did I exhaust that topic or no?
It's good. But back to how.
How?
Take an assessment. Read it. And I think you always say this, that it's kind of a more the merrier, right? Obviously, we like the golden, we like the Enneagram, we like a number of different assessments that we feel are really true and valid and useful. But you always kind of say, just take anything. I'd searched this morning for free personality test. 500 billion hits came up, I think.
No kidding?
Yeah.
All right. So Sara actually was sharing with me a little bit earlier today about, she said, okay, well, I'm going to go do one that looks really silly. Tell them the story.
Yeah, I'm going to put you to the test, because I want to say, how does somebody use something that's out there and free? How do I actually use this for growth? So I found a list of the 5 best free personality assessments.
Okay, the 5 best.
The first one was the MBTI. Then the second one was Test Color.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And it was, who knows, 40 different color swatches. And you just picked, in order of your preference, the colors you like.
Okay.
And then the colors told me my personality.
Yeah.
And then I read it and I thought, well, that sounds nice. Not sure it's me, kind of horoscopy, where everybody would feel good reading it. So let me take the opposite. So I did it again, picking my least favorite colors first. Got that report. And again, I thought, well, that kind of sounds like me too. So then I called in Bethany, our coworker, and had her read them and said, Bethany, which one of these do you think is me? And she said, well, they both kind of sound like you. And then she picked the one that was the opposite of me. And so I'm like, okay, what do I do when I get an assessment that I don't know if it's valid? I don't know if it's useful, but here it is saying that I'm innovative, well thought, whatever that means, careful and attuned to others.
Okay. There's some pieces in there.
Yeah. So how do I use this?
Well, I think okay, now you're like challenging my the more the merrier thing, because I generally don't include horoscopy kinds of things in the more the merrier.
Okay, well, tell me if this sounds like me. The qualities that characterize my personality.
Yeah.
My emotional intelligence, my organization abilities, my insight, and my creativity. See, I don't feel like I'm creative.
Yeah,
That's why I like design thinking.
I think it's half and half, right? I think your desire to be creative is in there.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, Sara, is that the way that you can use this is exactly the way you're using it at this very moment. To say, I don't feel that creative. Why would it say I'm creative? Maybe I should pay attention to myself for a couple of days and figure out if I'm doing more. I love the fact that you took it to Bethany, right? And that you said, what do you see in this? Right. And by the way, with almost any of these assessments, if you've got a dear friend, a trusted coworker, a spouse, someone in the family, to share your report with them and get their take on how you show up, I think that's a really strong idea as well, right? But the thing that happens, and if you just took it this morning, we're not going to see lens change 4 hours later. But over the next couple of days, you're going on vacation next week, right? It's like, wow. I mean, I kind of discounted that personality measure, but it's interesting. A couple of things showed up. I wonder if I really am, right? Fill in the blank. But the thing that I hope I can say clearly enough for people to get is when I say to myself, even, not even out loud, I wonder if I really am. That represents challenge and contradiction. It represents a little bit of challenge that my current lens, because I use the word I wonder if, isn't making perfect sense of. If you could just dismiss it outright, like if it said something about you are highly organized after I took the thing, this same
said that you were highly organized.
Said that I was highly organized, I would dismiss it outright. I wouldn't spend any time. And maybe that's saying more about me than anything else, but it's like I wouldn't think for a second that, oh my gosh, this thing, I don't know about this, but maybe there's something else in the report that gets me to say, I wonder if there's an outside chance there's a piece of that in me, or I wonder if that's a little bit true. You've introduced this tiny bit of challenge and contradiction, that what those questions demand is an inside out answer, a more self-authored, more self-aware answer. And so how long did it take you to do the test color? Just one of them, not both of them?
Like under 5 minutes.
Okay. So in under 5 minutes, here we've sat and talked about this for more than 5 minutes, right? So it's like this kind of thing, plus this time that you spent talking to Bethany about it, right? I mean, all of this, what you've done just going, is there even a chance that this makes a difference, has already made a difference?
Yeah. All right. You
Right.
sold me. I'm not going to recommend that people go take the test color, other than it's fun to pick your favorite colors.
Yeah.
But taking something like the Golden or the Enneagram,
Yeah.
something that is a little more reliable and respected in the field is a super valuable thing. And unless there's another big point you want to make, I think this is a good way to end this episode, because it's going to feed into where we're going next, which is about getting feedback and getting kind of other people's perceptions of how they experience you. And we have come up with a really fun way that we actually use the personality assessment as the jumping off point for that personality. So make sure you come back next week and we'll talk about another way you can really use your personality for growth. But any closing words? I
mean, I think I'd like to just throw out a couple of things for someone who's saying, we'll be a little bit more specific, right?
Yeah.
The Enneagram, folks, if you don't know it, I don't know what rock you've been living under, but it is like hot right now. It is in the millennial generation. I hear people my age talking about it. It's like everybody's talking the Enneagram.
You're a type 1 through 9. If you hear people talking about what type they are.
Yeah, they're 1 through 9. You ultimately assess what you are yourself. There are instruments that can help you move along that way. There are free versions of it that will get you started. But really what you're going to do is you're going to go read about the theory and see if what you think in relationship to yourself. But Ian Morgan Cron, C-R-O-N, is one of the leaders in this field. Mm-hmm. He has 2 assessments that he didn't even develop, but he thinks they're the best out there, and I think they're really good, called the IEQ 9 The standard version of that is $60. So there's an expense related to it. They've got a really deep, more complete version of it that is about double that. There are principlesu.com, principles, Principles, U, the letter U, as in unicorn.
YOU.
Oh, YOU, not
Yeah.
just you. Well, thank you for correcting
You're
that.
welcome. Principles U.
YOU.com is Ray Dalio, who some of you guys may have heard of, and John Golden and Adam Grant and some others are sort of behind the creation of this instrument. It right now is completely free. It is web-based feedback. It's hard to really print anything out,
It's pretty thorough.
but it's pretty thorough. And time will tell the effectiveness of that instrument, but I've taken it, Sarah's taken it. There's a lot of good stuff in there that has got me either confirming or thinking about this in some ways. I've really been digging deep on the Enneagram lately and listening to podcasts and reading, and there are people who have Instagram pages, some really strong experts. Is it Beatrix? No, I'm getting her name wrong. Yeah. Beatrice Chestnut. I'm sorry, we didn't look that up. She's written a great book. She's got a great website. I think she's got a great Instagram page. Anyway, the point being, if you type in free personality assessments, you're going to get 5 billion hits. That's a little much to sort through, but do what Sara did and go to the 5 best and take one of them. I so would encourage you to do this with the idea, and this is where we can end, is that anything you take, the Enneagram, the most perfect validated version, I don't believe, you don't believe, is created to define you.
For sure.
It is, but it can be used really effectively for you to refine your understanding of yourself. And folks, that's the goal. I mean, we want you to keep growing as a grown-up. It's why we do this podcast. It's why we do what we do for a living, is something inside of us that wants to see people grow and to kind of slide all the personality assessments off the table and say, I'm not a personality test person. I know who I am. You're just missing out on great opportunities to allow research and theory to speak into your life, not to define you, but to refine your understanding of yourself. So if you have a great snappy way to close this episode, do it. If not, that's goodbye from me.
I think that's great. Let it refine, not define.
See y'all soon.
See ya.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Growing as Grown-Ups. Take a second and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes, and tell your friends. You'll find all of the goods related to this episode, including the transcript, videos, links, and other ways we can help you keep growing as a grown-up on our website, growinggrownups.com. Growth isn't easy, but it's completely within your reach. Until next time, journey well, friends.